I'm Elisabeth Cooper, 48 years old, and I spent 15 years building what I thought was an unshakable reputation as one of the top sustainability consultants on the West Coast. But what my so-called office friends did to cover up their catastrophic mistake almost destroyed everything I'd worked for. And what they did to cover it up was even worse. If you've ever been stabbed in the back by people you trusted at work, been made the scapegoat for someone else's incompetence, or watch toxic colleagues destroy your career to save their own skins, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of professional betrayal. My story starts in a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, where our boutique sustainability consulting firm, EcoVision Strategic, occupied 3 floors of exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. Unlike the sterile corporate offices you might imagine, our space hummed with the energy of passionate environmentalists who genuinely believed we were changing the world one corporate client at a time. The scent of fair trade coffee from our in-house roastery mixed with the earthy smell of the living moss walls that lined our main conference areas. Solar panels powered everything, rainwater collection systems fed our rooftop garden, and every piece of furniture was either reclaimed or made from sustainable materials. It wasn't just our office, it was our manifesto. I didn't start out planning to save the world through spreadsheets and compliance reports. 23 years ago, fresh out of my environmental science master's program at UC Berkeley, I was just another idealistic grad student who wanted to make a difference. My first job was with a small environmental consulting firm in San Francisco, where I learned that real change happened not through protests or legislation, but through helping massive corporations understand that sustainability wasn't just good PR, it was good business. My mentor, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, taught me that every environmental regulation, every carbon offset program, every supply chain audit was an opportunity to prove that doing right by the planet could also mean doing right by shareholders. She showed me how to speak the language of profit margins and risk management, how to translate environmental impact into terms that executives understood: liability, compliance costs, regulatory penalties, and competitive advantages. My first big break came during the early days of carbon trading markets, when most companies were scrambling to understand what new environmental regulations would mean for their bottom lines. I developed a carbon footprint analysis system that could identify cost-saving opportunities while ensuring regulatory compliance. Instead of just telling companies what they were doing wrong, I showed them exactly how much money they could save by doing it right. My methodology helped a major pharmaceutical company reduce their manufacturing emissions by 37% while cutting production costs by $8.2 million annually. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who this young consultant was who could make environmental compliance profitable. Those early victories taught me that my strength lay in seeing the big picture, understanding how environmental regulations, corporate operations, and financial performance interconnected in ways that most consultants missed. I could walk into a boardroom full of skeptical executives and within an hour have them excited about sustainability initiatives they'd previously dismissed as expensive feel-good measures. I understood the science, spoke the language of business, and had the track record to prove that environmental responsibility and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. But my success also created a blind spot that would later prove nearly fatal to my career. I trusted too easily, especially when people shared my passion for environmental work. Over the next 10 years, I built my reputation project by project, client by client. I helped a Fortune 500 manufacturing company avoid $50 million in EPA penalties by redesigning their waste management systems. I guided a major retailer through a supply chain audit that not only eliminated potential human rights violations, but also reduced their procurement costs by 12%. I developed sustainability reporting frameworks that became industry standards, spoke at conferences across 3 continents, and published papers that other consultants cited in their own work. My client roster read like a who's who of corporate America: technology giants, pharmaceutical companies, automotive manufacturers, and financial institutions all sought my expertise when they needed to navigate the increasingly complex landscape of environmental regulation and corporate social responsibility. The golden period of my career began when I joined EcoVision Strategic as a senior partner 7 years ago. The firm's founder Marcus Webb had recruited me specifically to lead their corporate compliance division and expand their client base beyond the Pacific Northwest. Marcus was one of those rare leaders who understood that great employees needed autonomy, resources, and the freedom to pursue excellence without micromanagement. He gave me carte blanche to hire my own team, choose my own projects, and develop new service offerings that aligned with my expertise. Within 3 years, my division was generating 60% of the firm's revenue, and I was being considered for a promotion to managing partner. My team was everything I'd hoped for in a professional environment. James Morrison, our lead data analyst, had a PhD in environmental engineering and could transform raw environmental data into compelling visualizations that made complex compliance issues accessible to non-technical executives. Lisa Park, our junior consultant, brought fresh perspectives from her background in corporate law and had an uncanny ability to spot potential regulatory issues before they became problems. Together, we developed a reputation for delivering results that exceeded client expectations while building genuine relationships based on trust and shared commitment to environmental excellence. The work itself energized me in ways that surprised colleagues who saw consulting as a stepping stone to something else. I loved the puzzle of each new client engagement, understanding their unique operational challenges, regulatory environment, and corporate culture, then designing solutions that fit seamlessly into their existing business processes. There's something deeply satisfying about helping a company realize they can reduce their environmental impact while increasing their profitability. Watching executives have that light bulb moment when they understand that sustainability isn't a cost center but a competitive advantage. I felt like I was living my purpose every single day. But even during those golden years, there were subtle warning signs I should have recognized. Marcus had begun bringing in new partners who seemed more interested in rapid growth than sustainable business practices. The company culture started shifting from collaborative to competitive, with partners increasingly focused on individual performance metrics rather than collective success. Office politics, which had been virtually non-existent in the early days, began creeping into daily interactions. Partners started forming alliances, excluding others from strategic decisions and competing for the highest profile clients rather than focusing on the work that best served our mission. The catalyst for everything that followed began on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing environmental impact assessments for 3 different clients when Marcus called an all-hands meeting to announce our biggest client win ever. Meridian Industries, a massive conglomerate with operations in manufacturing, energy, and logistics. The 3-year $15 million contract would require a comprehensive sustainability transformation across all their business units, exactly the kind of high-impact, high-visibility project that could establish EcoVision as a national leader in corporate environmental consulting. As Marcus outlined the project's scope, I felt that familiar excitement building. This was the kind of work I'd spent my entire career preparing for. The deeper story of my professional development reveals patterns that would later become crucial to understanding how my colleagues could so easily manipulate the situation to their advantage. When I first started at EcoVision, the firm's culture emphasized collaboration and shared success. Partners mentored junior staff, teams shared resources freely, and everyone understood that the firm's reputation depended on collective excellence rather than individual star power. I thrived in this environment, naturally taking on a mentoring role with newer consultants and freely sharing my methodologies and client relationships with colleagues who could benefit from them. This collaborative approach had served me well throughout my career. At my previous firm, I'd built lasting relationships with clients who followed me from project to project, not because I jealously guarded those relationships, but because I consistently delivered exceptional results while treating everyone with respect and professionalism. I believed that success was abundant, that there was enough high-quality work for everyone to prosper if we focused on excellence rather than competition. This philosophy had earned me the trust of colleagues who knew I would share credit generously, support their professional development, and advocate for their advancement when opportunities arose. But as EcoVision grew and the stakes increased, I began noticing troubling changes in how some partners operated. There were subtle shifts in meeting dynamics, important decisions being made in private conversations that excluded key stakeholders, information being withheld until the last minute, and credit being claimed for collaborative work. The firm's rapid growth had attracted partners who came from more traditional consulting environments where competition was fierce and collaboration was seen as weakness. These new partners brought different values and working styles that gradually began shifting the firm's culture in ways that felt foreign to those of us who'd been there since the beginning. Marcus, perhaps overwhelmed by the challenges of managing rapid growth, seemed increasingly distant from day-to-day operations. Where he'd once maintained close relationships with all partners and stayed involved in major project decisions, he now delegated more responsibility to a small group of newer partners who appeared to have his ear. This inner circle, consisting of Richard Cooper, no relation, despite the shared surname, Amanda Foster and David Park, had joined the firm within the past 2 years and brought aggressive business development approaches that prioritized growth over the methodical relationship-based approach that had built the firm's reputation. The warning signs were there if I'd been looking for them. Richard had a habit of presenting collaborative work as his own individual accomplishments during client presentations. Amanda frequently scheduled important meetings without including relevant team members, then claimed those exclusions were administrative oversights. David had begun cultivating separate relationships with my clients, ostensibly to provide additional support but often resulting in confusion about who was leading various project components. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, easily explained by miscommunication or different working styles. But together, they formed a pattern of behavior that should have alerted me to the political maneuvering happening beneath the surface. My fundamental misreading of the situation stemmed from my belief that competence and integrity would always prevail in professional environments. I built my career on the assumption that doing excellent work, treating people fairly, and maintaining the highest ethical standards would naturally lead to success and respect. This worldview had served me well for 2 decades, but it left me unprepared for colleagues who viewed success as a zero-sum game where advancement required diminishing others rather than elevating everyone. The day everything unraveled started like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., my usual time, and spent the first hour reviewing the latest regulatory updates that could impact our active projects. The morning sunlight streaming through the warehouse windows caught the dust motes dancing above my desk, where 3 monitors displayed client dashboards, regulatory databases, and project timelines. I was deep in analysis of new EPA guidance documents when my assistant Jennifer knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before, somewhere between panic and confusion. "Elisabeth, Marcus needs to see you in the main conference room immediately," she said, her voice tight with unusual formality. "Richard, Amanda, and David are already there, along with someone from HR and a person I don't recognize who looks like a lawyer." The walk down the hall to the conference room felt surreal. Through the glass walls that separated the conference area from the main workspace, I could see my colleagues' faces arranged around the reclaimed wood table where we'd celebrated dozens of successful project completions. But the atmosphere was entirely different now. Tense, formal, and somehow threatening in ways I couldn't immediately understand. Richard was shuffling through a stack of documents while avoiding eye contact. Amanda sat rigidly upright, her laptop closed in front of her, fingers drumming nervously on the table surface. David stared at his phone with unusual intensity, as if the screen contained information more important than whatever was about to unfold. Marcus gestured for me to sit at the far end of the table, a seating arrangement that immediately made me feel like I was facing an inquisition rather than attending a standard business meeting. The HR representative, Helen Wu, opened a manila folder and began reading from what appeared to be a prepared statement about serious concerns regarding project management and client communications. As she spoke, my mind raced to understand what could have prompted such a formal adversarial meeting. I'd been managing my projects successfully for years, maintaining excellent client relationships and delivering results that consistently exceeded expectations. The lawyer, who introduced himself as Thomas Bradley from the firm's outside counsel, began outlining allegations that seemed to come from an alternate reality. According to his summary, there had been significant irregularities in the Meridian Industries project that I was supposedly leading. Environmental assessments had been submitted with incorrect data and flawed methodologies that could expose both Meridian and EcoVision to regulatory penalties and potential legal liability. Client communications had been unprofessional and potentially damaging to the firm's reputation. Project timelines had been systematically mismanaged in ways that threatened the firm's largest contract. As I listened to these accusations, my initial reaction was confusion rather than defensiveness. Nothing Bradley described matched my understanding of the Meridian project's status or my role in its management. I'd been involved in the initial client meetings and had provided technical input on environmental assessment methodologies, but Richard had been designated as the lead partner for the overall engagement. My contributions had been limited to specific technical components that fell within my area of expertise, exactly the kind of collaborative arrangement that had worked successfully on dozens of previous projects. I think there might be some confusion about project roles and responsibilities, I said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite the increasingly surreal nature of the conversation. Richard has been leading the Meridian engagement, and my involvement has been limited to the environmental compliance components we discussed in the initial planning meetings. The response to my clarification revealed the true nature of what was happening. Richard, Amanda, and David exchanged glances that lasted just a fraction too long, a moment of coordination that suggested they'd anticipated this exact response and had prepared accordingly. Richard cleared his throat and began presenting what he described as documentation of my central role in the project's management. He produced email threads, project timelines, and client communications that portrayed me as the primary point of contact for Meridian's leadership team and the architect of the flawed environmental assessments that were now threatening the entire engagement. But as Richard presented this supposed evidence, I realized with growing horror that the story being constructed bore only a superficial resemblance to reality. Yes, those were my emails and my signature on various documents, but they were being presented without context, selectively edited and interpreted in ways that completely distorted their meaning. An email where I'd flagged potential regulatory concerns was being presented as evidence that I'd approved problematic methodologies. A project timeline I'd helped develop was being characterized as my individual work product rather than a collaborative effort. Client meeting notes where I'd provided technical expertise were being reframed as evidence of my leadership role in strategic decisions I'd never been authorized to make. The meeting concluded with Helen Wu informing me that I was being placed on administrative leave pending a complete investigation of the allegations. I would need to surrender my company laptop, access cards, and client files immediately. All client communications would be handled by other team members until the investigation was complete. The message was clear. I was being treated as a threat to the firm's reputation and business relationships, someone whose continued presence posed unacceptable risks to both clients and colleagues. Walking back to my office to collect my personal belongings felt like a surreal dream sequence. Colleagues who'd worked closely with me for years suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact or hurried past without their usual friendly greetings. The vibrant collaborative workspace that had felt like a second home now seemed hostile and unwelcoming. As I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, photos from client celebrations, awards from industry organizations, books that had shaped my professional development, I kept expecting someone to explain that this was all a misunderstanding that would be resolved quickly and amicably. But as I surrendered my laptop to IT security and watched them deactivate my access to client databases and project management systems, the reality of my situation began to crystallize. This wasn't a temporary administrative measure or a routine investigation of project management issues. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to remove me from the firm and shift responsibility for whatever had gone wrong with the Meridian project onto my shoulders. My trusted colleagues, people I'd mentored, collaborated with, and considered friends, had chosen to protect themselves by sacrificing my career and reputation. The first attempt to gaslight me began less than 24 hours after my suspension. Helen Wu called to schedule what she described as an informal conversation to help clarify my role in the Meridian project and give me an opportunity to provide additional context for the allegations. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in a sterile conference room at a downtown hotel, neutral territory that emphasized the adversarial nature of our relationship while avoiding the complications of meeting at the EcoVision offices where other employees might witness our discussion. When I arrived at the hotel conference room, I found Helen accompanied by Thomas Bradley and another lawyer I didn't recognize. The setup immediately signaled that this was anything but the informal conversation Helen had described. The lawyers had arranged stacks of documents, legal pads, and recording equipment on the table between us. Helen began the session by reading a prepared statement about my cooperation with the investigation and the importance of complete honesty and transparency in resolving the situation quickly and amicably. What followed was 3 hours of sophisticated psychological manipulation disguised as fact-finding. Bradley began by presenting me with documents that supposedly demonstrated my central role in the Meridian project, but when I tried to explain the context surrounding those documents or clarify my actual responsibilities, I was repeatedly interrupted with questions designed to confuse rather than clarify. If you weren't responsible for client communications, why does this email show you responding directly to Meridian's environmental compliance officer? If Richard was leading the project, why do these meeting notes indicate that you were setting project timelines and deliverable schedules? The questions were crafted to make my legitimate explanations sound like evasions or lies. When I explained that I'd responded to technical questions because they fell within my area of expertise, Bradley reframed my response as an admission that I'd exceeded my authorized scope of work. When I clarified that my input on project timelines was part of normal collaborative planning processes, the lawyers suggested I was minimizing my leadership role to avoid accountability for missed deadlines and budget overruns. Most insidiously, they began introducing documents I'd never seen before, email communications that appeared to be from my account but contained language and decisions I couldn't remember making. When I questioned the authenticity of these communications, Helen suggested that the stress of managing such a complex project might have affected my memory of specific interactions. The implication was clear: either I was lying about my involvement or I was so incompetent that I couldn't remember my own work product. The meeting concluded with Bradley presenting what he called preliminary findings that painted a picture of systematic project mismanagement under my leadership. According to their narrative, I had exceeded my authorized role, made technical decisions without proper consultation, communicated with clients in ways that contradicted firm policies, and delivered work products that failed to meet basic professional standards. The environmental assessments I'd supposedly overseen contained fundamental errors that could expose Meridian to millions of dollars in regulatory penalties and potential criminal liability for environmental violations. As I listened to this fabricated version of events, I realized that my colleagues had spent weeks or possibly months constructing an elaborate alternative reality where I was the villain in a story of professional incompetence and ethical lapses. Every collaborative email, every technical consultation, every routine project interaction had been recontextualized as evidence of my individual responsibility for problems I was only beginning to understand. The people I'd trusted had not only betrayed me, they'd done so with a level of premeditation and sophistication that suggested this had been planned long before the Meridian project encountered any difficulties. The systematic isolation began immediately after the hotel meeting. When I tried to log into my company email account to review the documents Bradley had referenced, I discovered my access had been permanently revoked. When I called colleagues who'd worked on other projects to ask if they'd been contacted by the investigation team, their responses were uniformly evasive and uncomfortable. "I really can't discuss ongoing legal matters," became the standard response, delivered in tones that suggested they'd been coached on how to handle my inquiries. James Morrison, who'd been my closest collaborator and whom I'd considered a genuine friend, initially seemed willing to discuss the situation. When I reached him on his personal cell phone, he agreed to meet for coffee at a cafe near his apartment, away from the office environment where our conversation might be monitored or reported. But when we met, his demeanor was entirely different from our usual easy rapport. He seemed nervous, distracted, and unwilling to make direct eye contact as we discussed what had happened. "Elisabeth, I want you to know that I don't believe the things they're saying about you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction and his body language suggested he was uncomfortable even having this conversation. "Your work has always been exemplary, and the idea that you would deliberately submit flawed environmental assessments just doesn't make sense based on everything I know about your professional standards." But as our conversation continued, it became clear that James had been told things about the investigation that made him question whether supporting me publicly would be wise for his own career prospects. "They're saying there might be criminal liability involved," he said, glancing around the cafe as if he was worried about being overheard. "Environmental violations can trigger federal prosecutions, and if the firm gets investigated by the EPA or the Justice Department, everyone who worked on the project could be scrutinized." The message was clear: associating with me had become professionally dangerous for my former colleagues, regardless of their personal beliefs about my competence or integrity. James ended our meeting by suggesting that I should consider retaining my own legal counsel and perhaps exploring alternative resolution options that might allow me to move forward with dignity rather than fighting allegations that could drag on for months or years. It was kindly meant advice, but it reinforced my growing understanding that I was truly alone in this fight. Lisa Park's response was even more devastating because it was more direct. When I finally reached her after several days of unreturned calls, she was coldly professional in a way that felt like a complete repudiation of our previous mentoring relationship. "Elisabeth, I've been advised not to discuss the Meridian project with anyone outside the firm's legal team," she said, using the tone she might use with a stranger who'd called to discuss a business matter. "I hope you understand that I need to protect my own professional interests, and that means following company policies regarding ongoing investigations." The conversation that ended our relationship was brief and devastating. When I tried to explain that I'd been set up and that the evidence being presented was either fabricated or taken out of context, Lisa's response revealed how effectively my colleagues had poisoned the well. "I saw the environmental assessments you submitted," she said. "The methodology issues are pretty obvious once you know what to look for. I don't know why you approved work that clearly didn't meet basic professional standards, but I can't pretend I didn't see what I saw." This was the moment I realized the full scope of what had been done to me. Lisa was referring to documents that bore my name and signature, but that I had never actually reviewed or approved. Someone had used my identity and access credentials to submit flawed work products that would inevitably be traced back to me. The environmental assessments that were supposedly evidence of my incompetence had been deliberately sabotaged by people who had access to my computer systems, my project files, and my client relationships. The discovery that my computer access had been compromised led me to spend several sleepless nights reviewing my personal files, email accounts, and backup systems to understand the full extent of the manipulation. What I found was evidence of a sophisticated campaign of professional sabotage that had been ongoing for weeks before the Meridian project crisis erupted. Someone had been using my access credentials to send emails that contradicted firm policies, approve project timelines that were impossible to meet, and submit deliverables that contained fundamental technical errors. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Each problematic document or communication could be traced to periods when I was out of the office for client meetings, conference travel, or personal time. Whoever was using my access had been careful to avoid creating evidence during times when I could credibly claim to have been working on legitimate projects. The timing suggested someone with detailed knowledge of my schedule and working patterns, someone who had been planning this campaign with considerable sophistication and forethought. As I began documenting this evidence of systematic fraud and identity theft, I realized that I needed professional help to navigate the legal and professional challenges ahead. The kind of coordinated professional sabotage I was uncovering went far beyond normal workplace politics or competitive dynamics. This was criminal activity that could destroy not only my career but potentially expose me to civil and criminal liability for violations I had never committed. The law firm I contacted specialized in employment disputes and professional fraud cases. When I met with attorney Rebecca Martinez to discuss my situation, her initial reaction was skepticism that quickly transformed into professional outrage as I presented the evidence I'd compiled. "What you're describing goes well beyond wrongful termination or workplace harassment," she said after reviewing several examples of the fabricated communications. "This is identity theft, fraud, and potentially criminal conspiracy to commit professional sabotage." Rebecca's investigation revealed additional evidence that my former colleagues had been planning this campaign for months. Forensic analysis of the company's computer systems showed that Richard, Amanda, and David had been accessing my files and using my credentials to send emails and submit documents that would later be presented as evidence of my incompetence. Phone records revealed numerous private conversations between the three conspirators during times when they should have been working on client projects. Financial records showed unusual expense patterns that suggested they'd been meeting privately to plan their strategy. Most damaging to their credibility was the discovery that they'd been documenting their activities in ways that revealed their actual motivations. Amanda had sent emails to her personal account that described me as a threat to our advancement and suggested that removing me from the firm would create opportunities for rapid promotion. Richard had saved documents to his personal cloud storage that outlined strategies for repositioning Elisabeth as the fall guy for the Meridian problems. David had been researching my professional background and client relationships in ways that suggested he was planning to appropriate my business contacts for his own benefit. The smoking gun emerged from the most unlikely source. The firm's automated backup systems had preserved deleted files that contained the original, unmodified versions of the environmental assessments that had been presented as evidence of my incompetence. The authentic documents I'd actually prepared were technically sound, professionally written, and fully compliant with all relevant environmental regulations. The flawed versions that bore my digital signature had been created by systematically introducing errors into my original work, then resubmitting the corrupted documents using my access credentials. This discovery transformed my understanding of the entire situation. The Meridian project hadn't encountered problems because of my incompetence. It had been deliberately sabotaged by colleagues who were willing to jeopardize a multi-million-dollar client engagement to advance their own careers. They had been prepared to expose both Ecovision and Meridian Industries to significant legal and financial liability in order to create a crisis that could be blamed on me. The confrontation that would determine my professional future took place in the law offices of Carter, Wilson & Associates, Ecovision's primary legal counsel, 6 weeks after my initial suspension. The setting was deliberately intimidating, a 42nd floor conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland, where 6 lawyers representing the firm sat across from Rebecca Martinez and myself. Marcus Webb sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact as the meeting began. Thomas Bradley opened the session by presenting what he described as the firm's final resolution offer for my situation. Ecovision was prepared to provide 6 months of severance pay and positive references in exchange for my immediate resignation and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the Meridian project or the circumstances of my departure. The offer included language requiring me to accept full responsibility for the project management failures that had allegedly endangered the client relationship and exposed the firm to potential liability. This is a generous offer that allows Ms. Cooper to move forward with her career while avoiding the extended litigation that would inevitably result from pursuing these allegations, Bradley said, presenting a stack of documents that would formalize my departure from the firm. We believe this resolution serves everyone's interests, including Ms. Cooper's professional reputation and future employment prospects. Rebecca's response was a masterpiece of legal precision and barely controlled professional fury. Before we discuss any resolution, I think it's important that everyone in this room understands exactly what happened to my client and what evidence we've uncovered regarding the systematic fraud that was committed using her identity and access credentials. The presentation that followed lasted 90 minutes and systematically dismantled every aspect of the case that had been built against me. Rebecca presented forensic evidence showing that my computer access had been compromised and used to create the problematic documents. She displayed phone records and email communications that revealed the coordination between Richard, Amanda, and David in planning their campaign against me. Most devastatingly, she presented the original, unmodified environmental assessments that proved my actual work had been technically sound and professionally competent. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted dramatically as Rebecca presented each piece of evidence. The lawyers representing Ecovision exchanged increasingly uncomfortable glances as they realized that their clients had not only committed serious crimes but had documented their activities in ways that created undeniable evidence of their guilt. Marcus Webb's face grew progressively paler as he understood the implications of what his partners had done not only to me but to the firm's reputation and legal exposure. The most dramatic moment came when Rebecca presented recordings that David Park had made of conversations with Richard and Amanda, apparently as insurance against potential future allegations. David had been secretly documenting their conspiracy, creating audio evidence of their plans to frame me for problems they had created. The recordings revealed not only their knowledge that I was innocent, but their explicit intention to destroy my career to advance their own interests. We have clear evidence of identity theft, professional fraud, conspiracy to commit computer crimes, and systematic defamation, Rebecca said, addressing the room with the confidence of someone holding an unbeatable hand. My client's reputation has been deliberately and systematically destroyed by criminal activity perpetrated by people she trusted as colleagues and friends. We're not here to negotiate a severance package, we're here to discuss how EcoVision intends to make this right. The response from EcoVision's legal team revealed the panic that my evidence had created. Bradley requested a 30-minute recess to confer with his clients, but their hurried conversations in the hallway made it clear that they had not been prepared for the level of documentation Rebecca had compiled. When the meeting resumed, their entire approach had changed from aggressive positioning to damage control. Marcus Webb, speaking publicly for the first time since the meeting began, offered what amounted to a complete capitulation. Elisabeth, I want to personally apologize for what happened to you and for the firm's failure to properly investigate these allegations before taking action against you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's clear that you were the victim of serious misconduct by people we all trusted, and that the firm's reputation has been damaged by our failure to protect you from this kind of abuse. The resolution that emerged from this confrontation exceeded my expectations in almost every respect. EcoVision agreed to publicly acknowledge that I had been wrongfully accused and that the problems with the Meridian project had resulted from criminal activity by other employees. They would provide written statements to any potential employers confirming my professional competence and explaining the circumstances of my departure. Most importantly, they agreed to cooperate fully with law enforcement investigations of the fraud that had been committed using my identity. Richard Cooper, Amanda Foster, and David Park were terminated immediately and were required to surrender all client files, contact information, and proprietary materials. The firm's insurance company was notified of the potential criminal liability associated with their actions, effectively ending any possibility that they could find similar employment at other consulting firms. Legal action was initiated to recover damages associated with the Meridian project and to ensure that my professional reputation was fully restored in industry circles. The immediate aftermath of my vindication was both exhilarating and emotionally exhausting. Walking out of the law offices knowing that my professional reputation had been restored felt like emerging from a months-long nightmare into bright sunlight. The weight of constant stress, sleepless nights, and professional uncertainty that I'd carried for weeks suddenly lifted, replaced by a mixture of relief, gratitude, and determination to rebuild my career on my own terms. The industry's response to the revelation of what had happened was swift and supportive in ways that surprised me. Environmental consulting is a relatively small professional community where reputation and relationships are everything, and news of my vindication spread quickly through the networks of colleagues, clients, and competitors who had followed the situation with interest. Within days of the resolution announcement, I began receiving calls from former clients who wanted to express their support and explore opportunities for future collaboration. Meridian Industries' response was particularly gratifying. Their environmental compliance officer, whom I'd worked with on the initial project phases, called personally to apologize for the firm's failure to protect me from the fraudulent activities that had compromised our working relationship. More importantly, Meridian offered me a direct consulting contract to complete the environmental assessments that had been sabotaged, working directly with their internal team rather than through EcoVision. This opportunity represented not only professional validation, but a chance to prove that my original work had been technically sound and would deliver the results they needed. The media attention surrounding the case brought unexpected opportunities for professional growth and advocacy. Environmental trade publications covered the story as an example of how competitive pressures in consulting firms could lead to unethical behavior that ultimately damaged both professionals and clients. I was invited to speak at industry conferences about professional ethics, workplace fraud, and the importance of protecting whistleblowers who report misconduct in professional services firms. But the personal healing process was more complex and took longer than I had anticipated. The betrayal by people I had trusted as friends and colleagues had damaged my ability to form close professional relationships in ways that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. I found myself questioning the motivations of new colleagues, scrutinizing normal workplace interactions for signs of hidden agendas, and maintaining emotional distance from professional relationships that might once have developed into genuine friendships. The financial recovery, while substantial, came with costs that couldn't be measured in monetary terms. The settlement with Ecovision included compensation for lost income, damaged reputation, and emotional distress, but it couldn't restore the sense of professional security and optimism that had characterized my career before the betrayal. Starting over at age 48, even with vindication and financial resources, required a level of resilience and determination that tested my professional identity in fundamental ways. 6 months after the resolution, I made the decision to establish my own consulting practice rather than joining another firm as an employee. The experience of being sabotaged by trusted colleagues had taught me that the only way to ensure my professional security was to maintain direct control over my work product, client relationships, and business operations. Cooper Environmental Strategies became my vehicle for rebuilding my career while helping other professionals avoid the kind of systematic fraud that had nearly destroyed my reputation. The decision to become an entrepreneur at this stage of my career was both liberating and terrifying. I had the technical expertise, industry relationships, and financial resources necessary to succeed, but I was starting over in an environment where my recent experiences had made me more cautious and less trusting than I'd been throughout my previous career. Building a sustainable business required me to develop new skills in areas like marketing, business development, and operations management that had previously been handled by other people at larger firms. The first year of independent practice exceeded my expectations in terms of both professional satisfaction and financial success. My reputation for technical excellence, combined with the industry's awareness of the injustices I'd overcome, attracted clients who specifically sought my services because they valued both competence and integrity. The Meridian Project, completed successfully under my direct supervision, became a showcase for the kind of results I could deliver when working without the complications of firm politics and hidden agendas. More importantly, establishing my own practice allowed me to create the kind of workplace culture I believed in, one where collaboration was genuine, credit was shared appropriately, and professional success was measured by results rather than political maneuvering. As I began hiring junior consultants and building a team, I was determined to create an environment where the kind of betrayal I'd experienced would be impossible because transparency, honesty, and mutual support were built into every aspect of our operations. The broader impact of my experience extended beyond my personal career recovery to influence how other professionals approached workplace relationships and professional security. Speaking engagements at industry conferences and business schools allowed me to share lessons learned about recognizing warning signs of toxic workplace cultures, protecting yourself from professional sabotage, and maintaining ethical standards in highly competitive environments. One of the most important insights I developed was the recognition that professional betrayal often follows predictable patterns that can be identified and addressed before they escalate to crisis levels. The warning signs I'd ignored at Ecovision, the gradual shift from collaboration to competition, the formation of exclusive alliances among certain partners, the increasing emphasis on individual performance rather than collective success, were symptoms of cultural changes that made systematic fraud and sabotage more likely to occur. Looking back on this experience 3 years later, I can honestly say that surviving professional betrayal and rebuilding my career on my own terms has made me stronger, more resilient, and more effective as both a consultant and a leader. The people who tried to destroy my reputation inadvertently forced me to develop capabilities and insights that have made me more successful than I might have been if I'd remained in a traditional employment situation. The legal consequences for my former colleagues served as a powerful reminder that professional fraud carries serious risks that extend far beyond workplace politics. Richard, Amanda, and David faced not only termination and industry blacklisting, but criminal charges related to identity theft, computer fraud, and conspiracy. Their reputations were permanently damaged in ways that made future employment in environmental consulting virtually impossible. The short-term gains they'd hoped to achieve by sabotaging my career resulted in the complete destruction of their own professional prospects. Perhaps most importantly, the experience taught me that integrity and competence ultimately prevail over manipulation and fraud, but only if you're willing to fight for the truth with the same determination that others might use to obscure it. The months of investigation, legal proceedings, and professional uncertainty were difficult, but they were necessary to expose the truth and restore justice in a situation where powerful people had tried to sacrifice an innocent person to protect their own interests. The lessons I learned from this experience have shaped how I approach every aspect of my professional life, from client relationships to team management to business strategy. Trust must be earned through consistent actions over time, not granted automatically based on shared workplace environments or common professional goals. Documentation and transparency aren't signs of distrust. They're essential tools for protecting yourself and others from the kind of systematic abuse that can destroy careers and lives. Most importantly, I learned that your professional identity and sense of self-worth must be grounded in your own knowledge of your competence and integrity, not in the opinions or approval of others. When people you trust betray you in fundamental ways, the temptation is to question everything about yourself and your judgment. But the truth is that betrayal says more about the character of those who commit it than about the victims who suffer from it. Today, as I work with clients who face their own professional challenges and ethical dilemmas, I bring not only technical expertise but hard-won wisdom about navigating complex workplace dynamics and maintaining integrity under pressure. The betrayal that nearly destroyed my career has become one of my greatest professional assets, because it taught me lessons that can't be learned in business school or acquired through normal career advancement. For anyone watching this who has faced similar workplace betrayal, professional sabotage, or systematic fraud, I want you to know that justice is possible, but it requires courage, preparation, and the willingness to fight for the truth even when the odds seem overwhelming. Document everything, seek competent legal counsel when necessary, and never accept responsibility for problems you didn't create or solutions you didn't approve. The people who tried to destroy my career thought they could succeed because they underestimated my determination and overestimated their own cleverness. Professional fraud and workplace sabotage create evidence trails that can be uncovered by competent investigators, and the technology tools that enable such crimes also document them in ways that make denial impossible when the truth finally emerges. Your career, your reputation, and your professional identity are worth fighting for, but only if you're willing to do the hard work of protecting yourself, gathering evidence, and holding wrongdoers accountable for their actions. The alternative, accepting false accusations and allowing criminals to benefit from their fraudulent activities, not only damages you personally but enables them to harm others in the future. If you've experienced workplace betrayal, been made a scapegoat for others' mistakes, or watched toxic colleagues advance their careers through fraud and manipulation, please share your location and subscribe to join a community of professionals who understand that integrity and competence ultimately matter more than politics and manipulation. Together, we can create workplace cultures where excellence is rewarded, collaboration is genuine, and professional success is achieved through competence rather than sabotage. In the comments below, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with workplace drama and how you've handled professional challenges that tested your integrity and resilience. The more we share these stories, the better equipped we all become to recognize warning signs, protect ourselves from professional predators, and build careers that reflect our values as well as our ambitions. Your career journey is unique, but the challenges we face are often remarkably similar, and there's strength in knowing that others have faced similar obstacles and emerged stronger on the other side.